Hello and welcome to Unapologetic, the podcast on UK politics, news and stuff from a right-of-centre viewpoint. I'm Steve and I'm here tonight with Sam.
Hey.
And it's just the two of us and we're going to have a bit of a chat about the Labour Party conference. So in the UK here, the Labour Party has just finished its annual conference and they've come up with the usual raft of Labour ideas which we're going to just have a look at. We're mainly going to be focusing on the ones that have sort of hit the headlines and people are interested in. So, first of all, on economy, this is a good one. In his keynote speech, Mr McDonnell pledged to introduce a 4-day working week if Labour wins power. The Corbyn ally said he will reduce the average working week to 32 hours without a loss of earnings within a decade. And he said, we'll set up a working time commission with the power to recommend to government an increasing statutory leave entitlement as quickly as possible without increasing unemployment. So... So that's where we are. We're apparently gonna knock a day off, and we're gonna give them some extra holiday time, and everyone's gonna get paid the same. Sam,
It sounds like we're going back to the 70s, really. I mean, they're saying they're not classic socialists in the 1970s, isn't there? But it clearly is. You know, next they're going to leave bodies piling up in the street by the sounds of it.
what annoys me is their complete inability to even comprehend the beginnings of economics. I mean, where does the money come from to pay for all of these giveaways?
Magic money tree, where all their money always comes from.
I mean, you know, everybody. Some people are foolish enough to vote for this. They'll be like, "Oh, Labour are going to give us an extra day off every week. That won't have any effect on us at all. That's not going to. Our employees not going to try and cover the cost of that by increasing the goods which we then buy, or cutting staff to then be able to afford to keep the prices the same. No, because Labour are going to make the law so that you can't change their wages. How?
Yeah, but I don't think people think of it like in that far advance. So I think, and it's not like necessarily being foolish, but I think that if you were to work for an employer, you probably think, well, actually, my boss sets my wages, so why can't they set them, to a higher rate? Why can't they set them to 4 days a week and double the pay? And you don't necessarily think it all through. Yes, you then have to think about, well, then will the price go up? If you work in a shop, will the price go up on the things you're selling? And then what effect will that have? People don't always think it through to the conclusions.
And unfortunately, some people get the idea that they can use just a piece of economics. Like they'll say, well, normally the reason that you can't cut prices is because you've got competition and they might not, and so you can't increase wages. Your competition might not, then you'll be more expensive and you'll go out of business. And they'll say, but this would be a law, so everybody is the same. But we can't force it on countries outside the UK, so that would immediately make imports more attractive, won't it? Because they won't be affected by this regulation.
Yeah, well, that's what always happens, isn't it? And I mean, it's like, that's what's happened with electronics. I mean, electronics are really expensive. Then we've got loads of cheap Chinese imports of electronics. And now, if you look at a lot of the electronic suppliers and electronics, we had Dixon's, didn't we? That sort of went bust. You don't actually have Curry's PC World have now merged into one. So everyone's sort of trying to compete with what the outside influence is, really.
Well, also the internet, I think, has had an effect.
Oh yeah,
on
definitely.
Bricks and mortar stores.
But then the internet is because your wages costs are lower, aren't they? If you're Amazon or any other website, you don't have to pay the wage costs like you would if you're having to man a store 8 hours a day.
No, that's true. I mean, what people don't seem to understand is that, well, a lot of people do understand it, luckily, but some people don't, is that in order to produce goods, somebody has to work. Somebody has to be actually producing those goods at some level. And if you just give people random time off, that's got to have a consequence. It's got to knock on. And the consequence is going to be more expensive goods. And in the end, one balances out the other until you've really not benefited at all. So I think I can't believe that the 4-day week is back under contention. I thought we'd done away with it.
Yeah, I thought we had. I'm actually surprised the media didn't make more of a big deal about it. I also, about the extremism as well, because they were saying about looking at a review on the far-right extremism, and that actually passed me by a little bit. It was only sort of when doing a bit of research for the podcast I actually saw that, and I'm a bit surprised that the media haven't picked up on that more.
Yeah, I'm always amazed when they say, the biggest rising problem is far-right extremism. I mean, we haven't really encountered a very great deal. There were some occasional flare-ups, but it's not a very great deal of it, is there? Don't we see more a kind of radical Muslim terrorism? And don't we see more... look at the Labour Party and their problem with... they've got a real problem with...
Anti-Semitism.
That's the word I was looking for. Yeah, they don't seem to be announcing a big check-up on anti-Semitism, do they? I wonder why.
No, I mean, I don't completely disagree with them in having this review because, I mean, obviously, with the murder of Joe Cox, that was a far-right extremist. That, you know, any extremism is bad. So I don't have any issue with them commissioning any reviews. But I do think you're right. It does need to look just more than far-right because this anti-Semitism that's in the Labour Party, you know, a woman, a pregnant Labour MP was bullied because she was Jewish. That's just not right. And they should be, they don't ever seem to, they should be, you know, taken to task on it, and they seem to keep ignoring it all the time.
I mean, extremists anywhere can become monsters, can't they? Extremists anywhere
Of course,
who
yeah.
go so far that they're dangerous. But you notice they only talk about far right, and they don't even mention the kind of the far left extremism that we see a lot of. You know, some of these very far left movements turn out to be pretty bad themselves. Turn out to be bullying, and they want to silence people, and they want to crush people. And, you know, all of that kind of far left stuff, they don't even mention it.
Yeah, but it doesn't suit their agenda, does it? And I think given the stuff that they're coming out with, they seem pretty far left themselves.
Yeah. So, what else did they discuss? What about health and social care? I think there was a plan to scrap prescription charges in England, which is like Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland do it already. I mean, I think it would probably get support, but of course, it's just another thing. It's another promise to spend money, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, I think this is part of a wider debate, really, as well. I mean, it's just a bit of a soundbite, isn't it? They're saying scrap prescription charges. I think they've said that's kind of appeal to the more working class voter, you know, the people that do go and work hard and then have to pay these prescription charges, which, you know, aren't cheap, but I think that's just, it's an oversimplification just to say we're going to scrap them, because there's so many different models you could look at. You know, do you look at actually paying the true cost of the drugs? Because some of these antibiotics they're selling cost pennies and we're paying £9-10. You know, it's much more of a complex thing than just to say we're going to scrap prescription charges.
And quite a lot of people don't pay prescription charges already.
Well,
I mean, it's been tested, yeah.
Yeah, a great deal of people don't pay prescription charges, and they actually say, don't they? If you actually read the information on the NHS, they say it's not a charge based on anything other than sort of more like a subsidy that's set. So really, when you're paying a prescription charge, you're just sort of paying a bit more into the NHS, which, you know, I don't oppose, but, you know, I think it does need a wider review. But I just think to say scrapping it isn't the answer.
It doesn't seem entirely fair that Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland have a different rule to us, but then again, they're devolved authorities and they spend money on one thing, but not another thing that we might spend money on.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I would support scrapping prescription charges for long-term and chronic conditions. I'm not, having never had one, I'm not sure if there is any of that already, but I believe there are some people, like inhalers and things, I think people often have to pay for. And if those sort of things I wouldn't have a problem with. But I don't think, well, you always have to ask with a big promise like this, where is all this money coming from? Because in the end, it's got to come from the taxpayer.
Well, it does, and I think once you start giving things for free, people sort of take them a bit for granted. So I remember only recently, I don't know if it's the same in every area, but around this area, they stopped prescribing sort of like paracetamol and ibuprofen and things on the NHS because people were getting prescriptions for it because they were free, and you can buy them for like 50p or less in sort of supermarkets.
That's right, yeah. It's crazy to pay an extended price when you can get them so cheaply. And I've also seen the people talking about wasted medications where people have whole cupboards full of medication they haven't taken. And I think you're right. If you don't pay for anything at all, it does seem to lose its value. But I'm sure that's not the case for everyone.
I think I'd quite like to see, actually, to even it out, if I had sort of my perfect world, I think I would have a prescription charge for all and just make it a little bit lower. You know, if you had it sort of £1, £2, everyone, even if you were on benefits, yes, it would be difficult to pay, but everyone would be paying something. But, you know, obviously that's again an oversimplification. There's probably a lot more reasons to why you can and can't do that. So I think it does need a big review, but I think, yeah, just a soundbite, scrapping it is not the answer.
Okay, so to talk about Brexit. Now, we've done a lot of talking about Brexit this week, so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but let me just read out a news report that I got today. It says, in a tense vote, Labour delegates rejected calls for the party to back Remain in all circumstances if a second referendum is called. Instead, they backed a compromise motion pledging to negotiate a new Brexit deal and then put it to the people in a referendum, but they wouldn't commit to whether they would vote for Leave or Remain in their own negotiated deal in this sort of mythical future. The shadow Brexit Secretary, Keir Starmer, insisted it is very likely members still want the party to campaign to Remain. So they're going to, just get this right, they're going to negotiate a new deal, and having spent however long it takes to do that, they're going to have a referendum and campaign against the deal they negotiated.
I think they're just eating themselves apart over Brexit, though, because, you know, their northern heartlands want to leave, so they have to try and sort of appease them. You've got sort of the London elites that want to stay. So I don't know how they can actually sort of square that circle, really. So I do think they are in a bit of a predicament. So I can kind of see why they haven't made a kind of a sort of nailed the colours to the mast kind of thing. But saying that, how on earth are they supposed to actually go and negotiate with the EU with no policy?
Yeah, but this is clown shoes stuff, isn't it? I mean, they're talking about spending a load of time, if they win an election by some miracle, they're going to spend a lot of time negotiating a new deal that they're then going to campaign against. I mean, it's just a joke.
Yeah, but I mean, that's what they've always been like. I mean, that's why they're saying about taking no deal off the table. I mean, you cannot, you know, take no deal off the table and get any kind of deal. If you were doing any kind of business deal and you said to someone, you know, I'm not prepared to walk away, then they're gonna walk all over you, aren't they?
Put you over a barrel, yeah.
And then it's always been the way, and they just don't want to negotiate. I don't actually know. If what they actually want. I couldn't honestly put my hand on my heart and say what Jeremy Corbyn's thinking, because he's always said how anti-EU he was. And now he's saying he wants to remain. I don't know if it's just because,
He's against the weight of his party, isn't he? I mean, he's the Labour Party, certainly not the general Labour voter, the traditional Labour voter. A lot of them are for leave. But I think all of his kind of elected members and councillors, a lot of them are for Remain, aren't they? And that's what he's up against, this kind of wall of people saying we must vote, we must campaign for Remain.
Yeah, I suppose a little bit like Theresa May was, to be fair, in the sense that some of the Conservatives were, you know, split as well. But I think, you know, Boris has actually taken that clearer stance now, and I think Corbyn needs to do that as well, and unfortunately he hasn't.
And the Lib Dems are loving it, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, so let's move on to welfare. So, in a move welcomed by charity the Russell Trust, Labour promised to halve the use of food banks in its first year of government and end the need for food banks within 3 years. The action apparently would happen with a new act called the Fair Food Act to end hunger in the UK. And announcing the plan, the Shadow Environment Secretary Sue Hayman said that food is a basic human right.
Yeah, well, I mean, you shouldn't laugh at this because, you know, people do need food to survive. I love my food, but I mean, what does it mean? How much food? What food? Who defines what is the right amount of food to eat? What kind of food? How do you enforce it? It's just, there's so many questions.
Yeah, I mean, what is and isn't a human right is always an interesting debate, isn't it? And I know lots of philosophers debate it way above kind of our pay grade, as it were. But you know, professional thinkers debate it because, as I understood it, a human right has to be something that you're always entitled to, no matter what the situation. Now, the problem with food is it's a resource, and it's a limited resource. So if you say it's a basic human right and you must always give it, it therefore has to be taken from someone else. You've got to think about every situation with a basic human right. Is it always going to be possible to provide the thing that you're saying is a basic human right? And I think it's a challenge here. I mean, it's fair to say everybody's got we should try and make sure everybody gets a fair deal. Nobody is starving. Everybody's looked after. If people fall on hard times, we should, of course, look after them. As a society, we should do our best to keep them safe and to make sure that they're not starving or wanting. Of course we should. But calling things a basic human right actually changes the nature of law. If you're going to say that a government must provide people with food, right, must do that, and then you've really got to start answering your questions. How much food? How often? How do they go about doing that? What's the instrument to do it? Which body's going to do it? And where is the money coming from to do it?
And also, I don't understand quite what problem it's trying to achieve, because if it's trying to achieve people not being hungry, well, the food banks are doing that, and the food bank is sort of more of a charity method. So people are donating to food banks and they're giving them food to hungry people. So what they seem to be suggesting is, rather than relying on charity, they would like to tax everybody to make other people not be hungry. And I suppose that's just their answer to everything, isn't it? That the state gets involved and the state has to legislate and manage everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you could make a case that, you know, people who are waiting for a new kidney is a human right. Everyone should be entitled to a new kidney if they need one. But it doesn't answer the question, where do the kidneys come from? You know, I know it's a kind of a way out there example, but the point is human rights do come down to these basic things. And I just think it's dangerous language. It's absolutely fine to say that a society should be caring and conscientious and look after those who are doing less well and help them with a hand up, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, but I mean, they don't be consistent with that anyway, do they? I mean, it's like, look what they were saying about education, and they were saying that they want to get rid of private schools because that will help everyone be equal and fair, and they didn't look at it in the sense of, it's like with the food, rather than thinking what is the issue, and the issue is people being hungry, so we'll give them some food. They actually want to take it from people that do have food to give it to those that don't. And it's similar with the private schools. What they're saying is they're going to close all private schools. Now, well, they're technically called public schools, aren't they? But yeah, they're private fee-paying schools. So rather than actually think we want to address the issue of poor standards in education, they want to abolish private schools and almost, I suppose, then lower standards in education to match everyone up. And I always believe that you should be, if there's two people, one's doing less well than another person, you don't knock the person that's doing well down, you build the person that's not doing well up. And they don't seem to see that.
It just seems to me like they're just so jealous all the time. And hypocritical too, because let's face it, loads of Labour MPs send their kids to private schools.
Yeah.
These private schools they want to do away with. And they're also talking about doing away with them and confiscating what they own, confiscating the private schools' property in order to use it in whatever new schools they make. So they're going to close down private businesses and steal their stuff by law. I mean, that starts getting scary. When a government thinks it's got the right to do that, doesn't that start worrying?
Yeah, it's very Orwellian, definitely. It's really, really scary. But I think what's more scary is just their whole methodology with everything. And like I say, that they're key to equality. It's the same with everything that they do. Their key to equality isn't to raise the lower people up; it's to bring the higher people down. And I don't think that's the way to do it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying there should be bad standards in education. There shouldn't be. We should be striving every day to make kids in less well-off schools be doing better and helping them and giving them a step up. But bringing other kids down isn't the way to do that.
I've heard that as an interim, before they managed to close all of the private schools, they're saying that only 7% of students from private schools should go to university, because that would reflect the proportion of pupils who go to private schools. So what they're saying is, it doesn't matter how clever you are, how well you've done, if you're above that 7% that's allowed to go to university from a private school, you don't get to go. Instead, your place gets taken by possibly someone who hasn't earned it.
Yeah, and it's the same, isn't it? Because it should be equality of opportunity, not equality of outcome. I think I've got that the right way. You looked at me really like I got the wrong way. No.
Well, I was just trying to get my head around it. Make sure you had, because if you said it the wrong way around, that would have been funny.
No, but see, the point they're trying to, everyone should have the same opportunities to strive to do. So everyone should be entitled to go to university if they are able. So the university places should be available for everybody, and they shouldn't be, you shouldn't be stopped for attending because of because of your race or your gender or the amount of money your parents earn, all of that. But you shouldn't be able to go to university and get a first-class degree, which would be the equality of outcome, if you're unable to. It wouldn't be right for someone who's, as an example, unable to read and write to graduate with a first, when you've got someone that aced their A-levels and just told her, well, you're going to get exactly the same degree as this person because the law says you do.
Yeah, they seem to want everybody to be equal, whether or not they are actually equal in their abilities and what they can achieve and how hard they've worked. They seem to want to try and level a playing field, which in a way that stops people from wanting to work harder, to progress harder, to actually use their natural talents.
Yeah, and then they were saying about banning Ofsted, weren't they? Which I don't know how I felt about that really, because I suppose Ofsted does just provide a snapshot. You can go into a school one day and see things that perhaps on another day you wouldn't see. So I do think it just provides a snapshot. But they were suggesting that they'd run the inspection system by the local council. And I don't know if that'd be any better, to be honest with you, because that's going to have the same problems. And also, it's not going to be necessarily as independent, is it? Because every council is going to be interested in their own council area and making their own council area good.
I absolutely do not think that local councils would do a better job than Ofsted. And don't get me wrong, Ofsted have some problems, and it is a snapshot that sometimes misses the intrinsic truth about a school in an attempt to kind of tick a load of boxes and do a very quick look at things. It misses some of the things about a school that are important, like the ethos of the school and the way the kids feel while they're there, and the way that the teachers and the kids kind of work together to achieve things. I mean, not every school is going to be equal, because not every community is necessarily equal. The areas have different strengths and skills and talents, And it's never, nothing is ever going to be exactly the same.
And what really worries me about it, to be honest with you, is the council factor. Not because I've got anything necessarily against councils, but just the prime example for me is last year in Birmingham there was a school that Ofsted has put into special measures and removed the governing body and done various different things because they found actually it's an Islamic faith school, but it actually was carrying out some quite poor practices. So it found things like boys were being served lunch first and the girls were only allowed to eat after the boys had been served, things like that shouldn't have been being done. Now, if actually Birmingham Council, I don't know if it is a Labour council, but if it had been a council where a lot of councillors had a similar view and shared those views, would they be so keen to criticise? And also it's very difficult because if some of your voters are attending that school, are you going to be less inclined to criticise them because you feel bad that they might not support you? It's a bit of a minefield. So Ofsted could go in there as an independent body and make these comments and make the actions, take the actions.
I don't think I would have had a problem with some sort of reform of Ofsted or some sort of way to have a look at the way Ofsted is performing, because anybody can go wrong, and I think Ofsted has had times when it's made mistakes, and there's perhaps some of the things about it that don't work, and I know a lot of teachers aren't very keen on Ofsted at all. I think we could probably reform it, but to do away with it and replace it by either another system that is basically going to end up the same, or one that's run by councils that has the problems you suggest, I'm not sure it's a good plan at all. So, Home Affairs, let's go on to Home Affairs, because I've got some notes here. So, in the final day of the Labour conference, saw the party to commit to extend the freedom of movement after Britain leaves the European Union. Labour will also shut down the existing immigration detention centres if it wins the next election. Labour activists voted for a huge overhaul of border controls and an end to many curbs on migration. 2 years after Jeremy Corbyn campaigned on an election manifesto vowing to end freedom of movement, delegates at the party's conference backed a move to maintain and extend free movement rights. This motion said that all immigration detention centres should be scrapped, a move that could lead to the release of potentially dangerous illegals. It also said that migrants should be given an unconditional right to family reunion, making it easier to bring relatives here, and there will be no caps on arrival numbers or any rules stipulating certain skills or income.
Yeah, I think that's very it's A, sad, and B, scary. Sad because they haven't seen the problems with the policy in the past. So obviously a number of people said in the referendum that one of the reasons that they voted to leave, obviously not the only reason, but one of the reasons was because of uncontrolled migration, and that is something that Tony Blair did make happen. He made it so that there was complete freedom of movement from the EU member states. So I think some people did feel that there was unlimited numbers of migrants coming to the UK, and obviously an oversupply of labour then had knock-on effects. So I do think that he hasn't recognised that. And secondly, I do think that I've lost my point, to be honest with you. I lost my trail of thought. There's a second point and I completely forgot it.
On Tony Blair, he did say, I believe he said, that at some point he admitted, or one of the Labour Party members admitted, they made that change because they thought it would give them a voting bloc. And I think he also said that he regretted the decision to do it. I'm going by memory, so excuse me if I'm not quite got that right, but it was something like that. And I think we get ourselves too tied up over this, because everybody knows that there are lots of people who migrate here who are brilliant, who just do nothing but work hard and become part of the community. And to all of those people who love the country and want to stay, I say, come on, get your British citizenship and welcome to you. That's exactly what we want. Hard-working, decent people with great, family views and the way they want to live their life that's totally in keeping with our own culture. Come on in, that's what I say. But there are, of course, people who are not like that at all. And it seems like when you say unlimited and no caps and no rules and close only detention centres, doesn't that just lead to disaster?
Well, I think it does. I think we need to look at this differently in terms of general migration and EU migration. So I suppose in the terms of EU migration, what he's suggesting isn't a lot different from what we have now. So I suppose in the actual effect of that wouldn't be a lot greater. But in terms of mass migration from all other nations, there are some really, really, really desperately poor places out there, some real war-torn places, and if there was completely unlimited immigration, I think people would live to regret it, because people would want to come to the UK, and you can see why, because they'd want to improve themselves and have a better life. And what do we do if we get hundreds of thousands of people turning up from some very extreme countries, some very poor countries? What would we do?
I mean, what worries me a little bit is I sort of feel like some of them might have included this motion to try and stir up some controversy. Because what they'd like is a argument a bit like the Americans are having with Trump, where they say, well, you just don't like people to come here from other places. And I don't believe that's the case. Actually, I think Britain is a very tolerant, very reasonable place that welcomes people from all over, and they integrate well. We've got, centuries of that happening. The problem is, over recent years, there was such a fast change that communities felt overwhelmed. They saw change happening so quickly, and some people find that frightening, and some people find it unnerving, and some people get angry. And the problem is, when you start getting those negative emotions, that's when trouble starts. And I think we owe it to the country, including the people who've migrated here, to make sure that we have a look at who's coming in and who's going out, and just make sure, through sensible measures like the ones that have been proposed by the government, sensible measures just to make sure that everything is moving at a pace that isn't going to scare everyone, isn't going to make huge changes. We don't know what the consequences are.
Yeah, and I mean, you can do that by looking at people's skill levels or income levels. You need to be saying to people, like you said earlier, if you want to work and come here, that's fine, but we just don't want any person at all with no checks. I mean, what do you get if you got someone that had been found guilty for murder coming into the UK? Would we want that? We do have to be more strict. And yeah. I know they're obviously suggesting about opening up the right to vote as well for, I think, everyone. I don't really remember the exact policy.
Basically, everyone who's working here, I think, is what they're saying. And, I feel that, I've got no problem with people who are living and working here having votes in local elections, which they do. No problem with that, because they're contributing to the community and they're working hard. But I do think that when it comes to voting for your MPs, for your parliamentarians, these are the people that make the laws of the country. And I do think that is a right that should be maintained by the people who are British citizens. And that includes people who've become British citizens by moving here from elsewhere and going through the proper legal process to become British citizens. Of course they should vote. But I don't think just working here and paying tax is enough to give you a vote in national elections. I almost think that's part of why we want to leave the EU, because we want out to control our own affairs, and by our own, I mean all British citizens, regardless of where they come
I suppose that looks at it too, I don't think that looks at it necessarily in the right way though, because you're saying control our own, so that seems to suggest that people working here aren't our own people. I think that takes a bit of an insular view of it, really. I mean, I get that you don't want someone that's come here for a month and just says, right, that's it, I get to vote now and I'm going to make all the laws, because you're right, that's not fair. But particularly now with the settled status, I mean, someone that's been here working for 5 years will be entitled to settled status. I actually think they are people that should be able to vote. The citizenship test is a much, 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 much harder process. It's really expensive. It's quite a few £1,000s to apply to become a citizen. Yeah. Whereas a settled status, I think, would be maybe a better way of looking to vote, because if you've been here for 5 years, your kids go to school here, you're working here, why on earth should you not be able to have a say in the national laws that are set?
Well, I think that you make a fair case for making it easier and less expensive to move from settled status to British citizenship. I mean, that's a fair argument to have. But I do think that you need to have shown a level of commitment beyond just economic. And, if you come and work here, obviously your kids are going to have to go to school here. But you could, after voting, go and live elsewhere the next day, couldn't you?
Yeah, but it's tough, isn't it? Because where do you draw the line? Because you could have someone that was born here and has never paid any tax, doesn't have any really doesn't really ever pay much of an active part in society, and they're eligible to vote. But then someone that has been here for say 6 years, and a husband and wife that both work, they've worked every single day, they've paid loads of money in tax, and they don't get to vote because they've got a Lithuanian passport, as an example. And I kind of think, I get the point that you can't just look at it in purely financial terms, because why does someone have a right to vote just because they've paid money? But then at the same time, do they not have a right to vote just because they're foreign? That doesn't. It's just a tough one.
Well, I don't say it's not necessarily because they're foreign, because I would stress that anybody who's become a British citizen, whatever path they took, whatever place they came from, whatever the racial and ethnic origins are, whatever their religion is, all of those things, they should all have a right to vote. I think you asked where you draw the line. Well, I personally would draw the line at them having committed to become a British citizen. Now, I absolutely accept you make a fair case that perhaps that should be less expensive to do, because we shouldn't keep people out based on money. What it should be about is on wanting to integrate and to become part of this community and to love this country like we all do.
Yeah, I don't disagree there. I think if they did make the citizenship much, much easier, and not necessarily easy as in so easy you pass it, but if you showed a level of commitment for a certain amount of years, and you could easily commit to living here, I think that would be better than it is now, which is obviously a much more lengthy and expensive process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that got quite intense, didn't it? We've had quite a debate here today. So it seems to me, just to sort of draw it all together, like the Labour Party's conference has been pretty much what it is every year, which is them promising to spend vast amounts of money without saying where on earth it's going to come from, and then them making a few rallying points that cheer the left and perhaps antagonise the right. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right there. That's exactly what they've done. It's probably the most left-wing Labour conference I've seen in my lifetime, but
well,
maybe not some
interestingly,
others.
the most recent poll on party leaders showed not only is Jeremy Corbyn the least popular party leader in the country, he's the least popular, so I'm told, the least popular opposition leader of all time.
Because he just really reminds you of everything you were told, growing up. You were told how bad the 70s were, how people, were out of work, they were desperately poor, the bins weren't getting emptied, bodies were piling up on the street. Unless you go to university and then they tell you that, the 70s problems were caused by a global recession rather than the Labour Party, but universities are pretty biased sometimes.
Well, I was a kid in the 70s and quite a young kid, so I don't remember it very clearly, but I do remember it as being quite a nice time in as much as adversity creates a community. So there was that good thing about it, but all pitching together in tough times is not necessarily a selling point for a national election, is it?
No, it's not. And it did have some good music, I suppose, in the 70s, but like you say, that's not another reason either to be desperately poor.
Well, anyway, that's been Unapologetic, our podcast on UK politics, news and stuff from a right of centre viewpoint. Say good night, Sam.
Good night.
And good night from me. Bye all.